the health situation and the topic in general with the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and the complex complications that have gone on for me and for many other people, millions in fact. I've been trying to do these videos, rolling the camera and stumping up, struggling because I'm blocked. I have PTSD, being accused of being a liar and told that I'm a nutcase and faker, experiencing that sort of judgment from medical personnel for many years. And I'm trying to overcome it because I feel compelled to share some of my story. EDS complications are often very personal and internal. It's not something easy to share about. Some people, some EDS bloggers do it a lot more eloquently than I think I could. I do try to sort of sound eloquent to the best of my ability. It doesn't come out sounding the way that I hear it sound from some other people, and plus they're just brave. When people look at the situation of somebody with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or similar complex illness, these situations, they have a spectrum to them, and I'm calling them situations because I don't think, or rather I discovered that I didn't want to be my illness. This is something I'm afflicted with. This is a bad situation. It's not me. There are a few reasons why I think people judge and come to cruel, ignorant conclusions. Or rather, in order, ignorant first and then cruel conclusions. So these illnesses are really different to what is sort of more known in the textbook. We know more about illnesses like cancer and MS and lupus. Those are all terrible illnesses, but we know more about them. EDS and POTS dysautonomia, Lyme disease, and all the havoc that it wreaks, mitochondrial disease, fibromyalgia, ME, chronic fatigue, all those illnesses are very complex and just as serious and just as debilitating as the former illnesses I mentioned, which are more known in the textbook. Extremely debilitating, and they are taking lives. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is taking lives. It just took the life of another beautiful young woman who's only 24. I heard about it this morning on my Instagram, and it hit home for me because in 2016, I was 85 pounds. I was wasting, and I was terrified that I wasn't going to make it. And a whole bunch of things that happened and that I did and that I wouldn't give up on ended up having it turn around. It's almost another separate video to talk about that situation. I didn't give up and I wouldn't take no for an answer, and because I did get better in terms of stabilizing and gaining weight from that, I'm still challenged big time, but I stabilized from that dangerous, frail state. And many people are not able to stabilize, and they end up going on a feeding tube. And the scary thing is not everyone's body is able to take to a feeding tube, and when they don't take to a feeding tube, they're in trouble. That's what happened to this young woman. I was very close to needing a feeding tube, and during that time I was treated really badly. It was like a nightmarish episode from House when I was in the hospital. I was severely malnourished. With the fact that I'm autistic, my communication came out really weird, and my expressions were totally misunderstood and pathologized. And I was seen as some kind of neurotic nutcase as opposed to a person who was genuinely ill, even though I looked really ill. And only my internist, believed it enough that he ended up getting me to the weekly IV hydration and listened to me when I told him that I thought I needed pancreatic enzymes and I needed to take them. And because of those pancreatic enzymes, plus a whole bunch of other stuff for another video, I literally swallow 4 or 5 pills when I eat. I have to really prepare my meals, and I enjoy it. I have like starvation trauma. There's like pictures on Instagram, like I take all these pictures of all the stuff I can eat and I cook it up when I have the spoons, and I get really excited about it because if you've been through a situation where you couldn't do that and you were starving and you were scared, you really appreciate food. And I know that I might not be able to get away with this forever, but Anyway, I'm getting diverted on my story. I want to go back to people judging people with EDS and dysautonomia. Even though it's coming from a place of partial ignorance, addressing them specifically, if I were to address them, I would say, you have no idea how cruel you're being. Someone is scared. They're fighting for their lives. This thing does take lives. It causes, sometimes, a lot of us survive through, and I don't want to scare other zebras, but it's a serious condition. The complications are poorly understood, and we fall through the cracks on a lot of testing until doctors figure out how to do the right tests, if and when they're available. And everyone's different. Gastroparesis is one of the most serious complications. A lot of people with gastroparesis are accused of being anorexic and crazy and neurotic, and it's horrible. Imagine your digestive system breaking down on you, you're not able to eat, and you're getting treated that way. Can you imagine how scary that would be? That's what happened to me. And because they wouldn't listen, mostly, I had no choice but to get better and try and reverse it, and I used my instincts, and I felt like I was in a war with my own body that I had to win. I have to be so grateful that what I did at the times that I did turned things around, because it was about my pancreas being insufficient, which was a big one, and at least there was a remedy for that. It was also about infection and a whole bunch of other things, autoimmune, a whole bunch of other things, and I dealt with it. I was dedicated, and I managed to reverse it enough, but I'm damaged. Like, it's not hunky-dory. I have to swallow, my Creon, my ursodiol, which is like bile, because my gallbladder doesn't work anymore. Plus a digestive fiberzyme for my fiber, plus a super enzyme, plus docusate sodium. This is really personal stuff, and polyethylene glycol every night to prevent stenosis. I'm really enjoying eating, but it's not easy work. It's hard work, and I'm so grateful that I can still have some things, a handful of things. There's lots of things I can't have. I'm going back to why these illnesses might look like they're put on somehow. Well, the fainting and I mean, you can't control your blood pressure, so I don't understand why blood pressure fluctuations could be pathologized, because it's not possible to just drop your blood pressure on your own. That's like not possible. So I think it's ridiculous when doctors see numbers like that and they minimize it and go like call that person crazy. I think that's absurd. But gastroparesis, intestinal pseudoobstruction, is when the intestines are really slow to the point of like pseudoobstruction. That's so bad. I suffer with it, or at least I did more so. But also the Chiari malformation, the instability in the neck, it's very hard to diagnose. Sometimes brainstem herniations are so slight, they're hard to diagnose. They're best to be diagnosed in an upright MRI when somebody is standing up. These things are subtle. And also, the blood work often doesn't show up, but when it does, it can show weird inconsistency. All the electrolytes go low because we burn electrolytes because we are weak. Our collagen's weak, and we have to use 3-4 times as much energy to move around, so it's like going to a gym. So that makes sense why we would burn electrolytes by exerting. Or when we get sick, we get dehydrated very easily. They don't quite understand why, but that was featured in Grey's Anatomy with the girl with Ehlers-Danlos kept begging for hydration for IVs, and they were accusing her of being an alcoholic, and she was really upset. And it was a bit triggering for me to watch that, because I'm like, wow, I totally understand how she feels, how she was, willful and angry, and she's like, okay, I'm just leaving, and then her shoulder dislocated, and then the doctors were finally like, oh my god, Ehlers-Danlos. A lot of doctors are in denial about the hydration issue too. Like, my friend got yelled at the ER and told that she should just go and pretend to be an alcoholic and go to the addictions place if she wanted hydration or something because he wasn't going to give it to her. Even though she had, a whole bunch of information and papers about her diagnosis and what she requires by doctors who are specialists. So I think there's an attitude of fear among the medical personnel. It's changing because they realize they can't continue to be like that. They have to learn. They have to become educated. They can't continue to sort of stick their heads in the sand and treat people like crap because it's traumatic for people. It breaks down the patient-doctor relationships, and people don't get the help they need until it's way too late. I'm actually going to take my neck collar off and give it a break. A little bit of freedom for a little while can be gotten away with. So it is changing depending on where you are. The Ehlers-Danlos Society just got a $1 million grant for research to understand more behind, all the complications and potential complications, because everybody's different. What I can tell you is that society needs to clean up their act in terms of the way that they look at people like us, the way that they're looking at zebras. Like, here's an example. I watch a show that I love. It's given me a lot of good laughs, Grace and Frankie. It's really funny, even though sometimes I feel bad because it's a little bit ableist, how they keep, like, talking about how hospitals are so horrible and they hate hospitals and all this, because it's like I have to go to the hospital weekly and I have to take medication, and it's not my fault. Like, I'm not an invalid or less of a person. There's a lot of ableist remarks in TV shows and movies that now that I am disabled like this and challenged, like, I'm a strong person and I don't want to be like this, but I am. And it isn't me. Like, I am not Ehlers-Danlos. I'm a human being. I happen to be having to deal with this crap. And I fight it like a warrior. And I really don't appreciate a lot of the put-downs that are in movies and TV. So Bud, Grace, Frankie's son, he's dating a girl that has complex health issues. And they sort of they make her character a mockery. Like, they make fun of her fainting from what could be POTS. They make fun of her talking about food sensitivities. They treat her like she's a hypochondriac, that she's in the head. And this is how we're treated. And it's abusive. Like, it's not okay. Hypochondriasis, Munchausen disorder with yourself, now called factitious disorder. I was accused of that before I got really sick, and it's obvious that there's no scientific way I could ever be doing these things to myself, nor would I want to. I want a cure. Anyway, all those types of disorders are actually unusual. And there are millions of people suffering with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and dysautonomia and all the multiple chemical food sensitivities, mast cell activation disorder, like, millions of people. You can't tell me that millions of people are all a bunch of hypochondriacs when it actually is kind of rare, and it usually takes a lot of psychological damage for that to occur. And even in people with psychological damage, it may not occur. I mean, I come from trauma and abuse. I never had a desire to be sick. I always wanted to be able. When I was getting sick, I tried to control it, and unfortunately I hurt myself further trying to control it at first by crude means like coffee and nicotine and, drinks when I was in pain at night, and, under eating because, like, too much made me feel bloated, taking, like, digestive pills, like, just silly rudimentary stuff that I did because I wanted to be able to work, and, Gatorade, and, I knew what I needed to do superficially to keep going, but it backfired in my face, like I said in another video. I would give anything to not be sick like this. So it's really insulting that media and TV would make fun of it like that. And I mean, as much as Grace and Frankie is a hilarious show, has a great script for the most part, I don't like that part. That part hurts me. It feels a little bit like a punch in the heart every time that they crap on Allison, who's the character that has complex health issues. It makes me upset. And I don't think it's funny. I don't laugh at that part. I tried so hard to be normal for so long, and I'm not talking about being autistic right now, but they became intertwined because my autistic issues, like being differently wired, and my health issues, in a way, coping with the autistic issues created a pathway or a gateway to start coping with the health issues when they started to take me out. Because I knew how to seem fine and how to seem like I was listening, whatever, to cover being autistic, I knew how to do that to cover feeling tired or unwell. And I would go into overdrive. But, eventually my body broke down. I couldn't pretend to be able anymore like that. I couldn't pretend to be normal like that anymore. And so it kind of happened at the same time. My body and my mind broke down, and I couldn't continue to perform that way. And then the autistic stuff came out more. And unfortunately, this was at the same time as I started to get sicker. They kind of went together because the autistic stuff, like the fact that I was feeling too unwell to perform, and I was more challenged with like communicating and keeping on topic and not perseverating and describing what I was feeling and expressive language. And so I was totally pathologized and discriminated against when I tried to ask for help, when I tried to seek help for my worsening Ehlers-Danlos. So it was a horrible, traumatic, long ride to a diagnosis. And it was even harder. It was even hard after my diagnosis. It took them nearly 3 years to accept my diagnoses, actually plural. I would continue to hand them my reports. And talk about cognitive dissonance. The thing is that doctors' attitudes bleed out into society, and this is why society sees us this way, and it's cruel. We are the people that got hit with this unfortunate genetic bullet in this genetic roulette. A good portion of society is getting hit with this complex chronic illness stuff, and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is no longer rare. Cases like this young lady who passed away, they're extreme and they're so sad, and I could have been an extreme case. I consider myself, or have been considered by a geneticist who knows what he's talking about, not as severe as he's seen, but moderately severe. And I fight that tooth and nail. I'm doing self-care now. And before, I was so beaten down in my confidence from thinking that maybe I am an attention seeker, or maybe I am a self-entitled, selfish jerk of a person. Maybe I am just a bitch. And I didn't really have self-care. I was like the wounded healer, trying to be cocky and outspoken about things, but inside hurting. People like me need to stop being treated that way. And extreme cases like this young lady, I mean, she was skeletal in the end, and it was very, very upsetting to see those pictures of her. I don't want to talk about her experience too much because I don't want to violate anything, but it was really shocking because I had gotten down to 85 pounds and I was starting to get skeletal, and people were saying, your face is like skeletal. It was thin like that. It was like, my head looked almost too big for my body, and it was just, my bones were coming out. I just looked so tiny that it looked fragile. But I never got to the point of severe skeletal because I was almost there. I was 85 pounds, but again, I'm very tiny. Like, I'm just over 5 foot tall. So if I was 85 pounds and I was 5'6", that would have been really alarming. But still, it was bad, and it ended up turning around for me, and I'm so grateful because it was almost a miracle. And because I had that new lease on life, I ended up doing my album. I was like, hey, I'm gonna do this. I made the mistake of not doing it before, but I'm gonna do this now that I miraculously recovered from that ordeal. But I only ended up in that ordeal because of the way I was being treated. And I had been neglected for so long that my body just gave in and went into that state and still have flashbacks. And it's not okay to do that to people, society or doctors. You don't understand what's going on. It's very complex, it's cellular, it's metabolic, it's functional, but it is real. It is very real. And people need to understand that some people's own families ditch out on them. Not everybody. I mean, I have to thank the people that stuck with me, but a lot of people abandoned me during that time. In fact, this is really personal, but for a brief time, my husband and I broke up. We got back together. He's better now, but he was starting to be affected by what people were saying about me. He was starting to question it. That was horrible. That's gaslighting. I was gaslit. Horrible experience, and I don't wish it on anyone. It's bad enough to be really sick. It's bad enough to be suffering with swinging blood pressures and heart racing and palpitations and dysautonomia and difficulty digesting your food. And I'm working through it, and I'm trying to do things that make me happy, like art and stuff. I get flashbacks from the way I was treated by the medical system and the way that I was treated when I tried to open up about some of it. If you say that you have any neurological effects from these conditions, which are very common, you definitely can have neurological effects from them, neurological damage. I tremor. My memory is, I have a really bad short-term memory. I have difficulties. I'm smart, but I'm challenged, and some of it is because of health, not because I'm autistic, not because I'm neurodivergent wired. They're separate things, and I wrote about that in a blog. It's lateral violence within the community, so I was affected by that. I was affected by doctors, and even though I now am confident and I know who I am, and I know, that this is all real and that I'm a survivor, there's still the flashbacks. It's just the process. It's just my processing. And when I do the videos diary style and reflect on it and kind of talk about what I did, it feels a bit safer for me, I guess. But it's still going to be hard, and I'm not going to be able to do it often. Might be therapeutic to do it a little bit, but I really want people to hear the aspects of my experience that I think would be helpful to share, because I think a lot of people would really relate. And as for society and doctors, if any of you are watching, please put yourself in our shoes. You have no idea how hurtful it is to be dismissed when you're frightened and sick and weak and you feel like something terrible could happen, which is an actual possibility. There's nothing scarier than not being able to trust your local medical institution, that if you have an emergency, they're not going to know what to do with you. We need research, and we need a huge attitude change. We need a huge paradigm shift, because we need support. We don't need judgment. We don't need scrutiny. Can you imagine what that's like on top of battling a serious disease? To be judged and scrutinized instead of helped with compassion, instead of people having empathy for you. There's nothing more terrible. It's dehumanizing. So I'm going to wrap up. Hope I was able to say some things that were helpful and made an impact.